Jinwoo's attention was suddenly drawn to a magical portal that had appeared from out of nowhere, a clear sign that things were not as simple in this place as they seemed. The atmosphere shifted, instantly becoming heavy and somber. Jinwoo tensed his body on high alert as he stood still and waited, uncertain of what would emerge from within the portal. Jinwoo's expression shifted to one of strain as he muttered that he knew things couldn't possibly be this easy, not in a dungeon like this. His instincts warned him that something dangerous and frightening was on its way. Whatever it was, it seemed to be monsters, though thankfully not as overwhelming as the boss he had just defeated. Lifting his head, Jinwoo noticed a strange set of floating indicators above, some kind of display that hinted the longer he stayed here, the more complicated things would become. As he looked around, he saw someone, or something, emerge from the portal, stepping onto the cold stone floor. Another massive creature appeared before him, but it wasn't alone. Several monsters followed. Still, Jinwoo remained confident in himself, believing he could take on these foes even in his current exhausted state, and that thought alone gave him strength. He considered that if these monsters were anywhere near the level of Igris, he'd stand no chance, but fortunately they didn't seem to be. Glancing at the floating timer again, he acknowledged that this pressure fit the nature of the career change quest. Jinwoo realized he didn't have much mana left, but he was still doing well enough overall, even if he used his stealth ability. He reminded himself that each second of cloaking consumed exactly 1 point of mana, giving him a window of just 3 minutes. Still, with plenty of health and a reasonable amount of mana remaining, he resolved to hold out as long as he could. Just then, a wizard appeared from the shadows, activating a skill sharp enough to detect Jinwoo's presence, forcing him once again into battle readiness. The mage activated a powerful skill that kept him alert and protected from surprise attacks, using it to track Jinwoo's location. Floating in the air was an orb with a glaring eye, an artifact capable of detecting Jinwoo's presence even when he used his disguise ability. Jinwoo tensed, frustration rising within him as he realized he'd been discovered despite cloaking himself, something he hadn't expected. At that very moment, the knights in the room shifted their focus, locking onto his position in the air. The instant they had a chance to detect him in the open space, they prepared to strike. But before they could react, Jinwoo suddenly appeared, and even with his back turned to the monsters, massacred them with extraordinary skill. His power surged with each move, and by unleashing his abilities, he sent 2 of the monsters flying across the room. Turning toward where the 2 had been launched, Jinwoo's gaze sharpened as he activated his bloodlust skill. The powerful aura immediately caused the surrounding monsters to lose 50% of their attributes, an effect that took hold instantly. Jinwoo was well aware that bloodlust consumed 100 mana, meaning he only had 1 chance to use it. Shouting with determination, he declared that he had to eliminate as many enemies as possible within 1 minute. Surrounded by a swarm of monsters, he did everything in his power to drive back the majority of them, much to their surprise. Realizing they couldn't handle such a fearsome opponent, many of the monsters turned and fled en masse toward the open gate. But Jinwoo was reaching his limit. His health had dropped dangerously to around 1,000. With a low growl, he admitted to himself that this situation was far more difficult than expected. 1 minute wasn't enough for a battle of this scale. Worse still, monsters continued pouring out from the portal at a rate faster than he could eliminate them. They weren't as mindless as they had seemed. A sudden notification alerted him that his passive skill Fortitude had been activated. He would have to rely on it now. Frustration crept in as he reflected on his earlier decision to use too much mana on disguises, which now left him unable to activate other critical skills. Facing the horde was becoming increasingly difficult. He briefly considered using the return stone but hesitated. Would fleeing now mean he had failed the quest? The thought weighed heavily on him. Jinwoo's gaze drifted upward toward the clock hovering above the battlefield, and what he saw shocked him. It had only been 5 minutes since the onslaught began. The sheer number of enemies pressing in made it feel like an eternity, and he was struggling to keep up. Jinwoo pulled out the green stone of return, realizing with a heavy heart that he had no other choice if he wanted to survive. It had come to this, he would have to use it. But as he stood there, his focus narrowed on the stone. He seemed unaware of the danger around him. A weapon hurled by one of the monsters that had seized the perfect opportunity was already flying toward him. In the next instant, it struck him with tremendous force, landing squarely on his forearm. The impact was so powerful that streams of wind whipped violently around his body. Jinwoo couldn't maintain his footing, his strength gave out beneath him, and he collapsed, clutching the place where the blow had landed hardest. Suddenly, all the surrounding monsters fell into eerie silence, frozen in place, as if waiting to see what would happen next, watching Jinwoo, who lay still on the ground. Then, without warning, a great surge of wind erupted from where he lay as if a titan were rising. But it was just Jinwoo forcing himself back up, gathering every ounce of strength he had left. He bent slightly at the waist, his clothes torn and ragged, but none of that stopped him. Though the stone of return was still within reach, Jinwoo's gaze had changed, now filled with fury, a defiant look that could not accept defeat. He made it clear to himself he would finish this quest, and he would do so without retreat. Seizing the moment, he curled his hand into a fist, summoning his remaining strength. With determination burning in his eyes, he whispered to himself what a great opportunity this was for one final stand. Jinwoo recalled that because he had once been at rock bottom, he had always longed to rise to the very top, jumping as high as he could, driven by desperation and hope. He knew all too well the pain of being the weakest. The memories came flooding back, people questioning his worth, mocking his rank, doubting whether he could contribute anything at all. He remembered the scornful voices asking if he was the type to hide behind his comrades, the one who couldn't even kill a single monster. The sting of those words only fueled his resolve. Moments later, after leaping high into the air, Jinwoo landed hard, slamming directly into one of the monsters below. But even then the words followed him. He could still hear people calling him the weakest hunter, the infamous E-rank. He remembered how one man had listened to another speak about him with disbelief, unable to accept how someone so feeble could still be alive. What is it about him that makes him so weak, one had asked. Another scoffed that if Jinwoo joined their raid, the dungeon would practically complete itself, an insult wrapped in mockery. Despite the bitterness in their words, he also remembered the kindness. There had been voices urging him to rest, encouraging him to sit down and take a break. And then came a booming voice cutting through the noise, challenging him, asking if it wasn't his own fault for tempting death every time. Jinwoo turned toward that voice, uncertain whether he was hearing a miracle or a challenge. Could it truly be possible that an E-rank hunter could rise to such a level? His eyes locked onto the figure in front of him. To his shock, it was a younger version of himself, a mirror of his past speaking to the man he had become.